Every year, millions of tons of agricultural commodities, from coffee to cocoa, flow into European ports. To manage the environmental impact of this massive supply chain, the European Union is implementing a sweeping new set of rules. It is called the European Union Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products, or EUDR. The mandate sets a strict standard. Any operator bringing these goods to the European market must prove that their products do not originate from recently deforested land. This dashboard visualizes the technical requirements of the policy. Importers must show no forest degradation occurred on the origin land after December 31, 2020. To do this, they are required to submit precise geolocation data mapping the exact boundaries of where the crop was grown. This transfers the legal burden of proof directly onto European operators and traders. Before a single container can clear customs, they must conduct rigorous risk assessments to guarantee compliance. Top-down environmental mandates require flawless data to function, but dropping a requirement for exact coordinates onto global supply chains creates immediate friction when the origin points are inherently opaque. Far from the digitized ports of Europe, the actual origin points of these commodities are scattered across millions of remote, hyper-fragmented tropical landscapes. We can examine this by looking at Uganda and Indonesia. Both nations are major global suppliers of coffee, and both rely heavily on agricultural exports to generate foreign exchange and sustain local economies. A centralized European policy assumes a digitized, easily traceable supply base. The reality of on-the-ground farming in developing nations lacks the infrastructure to generate or transmit that level of geographic proof. By making market access contingent on sophisticated data tracking, the EUDR's strict compliance burden risks economically isolating the exact farming populations it needs to regulate. Without direct intervention to bridge this data gap, the EUDR will function as a regressive trade barrier. Cutting off revenue to these rural areas will inadvertently worsen the poverty-driven dynamics that cause deforestation in the first place. To understand why compliance is so difficult, we have to look at the demographics of coffee production. In Uganda, approximately 1.9 million households grow coffee. In Indonesia, the number is nearly identical, at another 1.9 million households. The Food and Agriculture Organization classifies a smallholder as a farmer managing an area of less than 10 hectares. In practice, many of these families manage plots significantly smaller than that. This chart displays the demographic breakdown. Smallholders make up 97.7% of coffee producers in Uganda and 98.4% in Indonesia. While a corporate agribusiness can file reports, that output is dwarfed by thousands of scattered plots. This creates a severe logistical bottleneck. Imposing a unified data standard like geolocation on a decentralized network of nearly 4 million independent households is exceptionally difficult to execute. These statistics represent physical realities. Coffee farming for smallholders is a manual, low-tech process, entirely disconnected from the digital infrastructure required to upload satellite polygons to a European server. Transferring the technical and financial cost of data compliance onto a resource-poor network guarantees market failure for the populations least able to afford the transition. To understand how this market failure connects to deforestation, we must analyze Uganda's macroeconomic output over the last 12 years. Driven by global demand, Uganda's total coffee production climbed 136% from 2010 to 2022. But overlaying the agricultural yield reveals a steady decline in farming efficiency, dropping from 0.62 to 0.54 tons per hectare over the same window. This data directly correlates with environmental metrics. Between 2014 and 2022, as national forest cover dropped by 12%, the total land area used for coffee cultivation expanded by 92%.
Stagnant agricultural yield is the primary mechanical driver of agricultural deforestation in the Global South. To stop the expansion, we must identify why smallholder yields are dropping despite the rising value of their crop. The primary constraint is a severe lack of capital to purchase basic, productivity-enhancing agronomic inputs. Without targeted financing, farmers cannot access fertilizers or disease control measures. The adoption data reflects this capital deficit. In Uganda, only 15% of smallholders use organic fertilizers, and barely 10% apply pesticides. Farming without modern tools or chemical inputs is intensely labor-driven and physically demanding. It leaves the crop highly vulnerable to weather changes and pest damage. This creates an economic trap. Because they cannot afford yield-improving inputs, farmers produce less coffee per acre. Because they produce less, they generate too little revenue to invest back into their land for the next harvest. Under these conditions, expanding into the forest is a rational, necessary survival strategy to maintain the harvest volume required to feed themselves. A European ban on deforestation will fail to protect the environment if it does not solve the farmer's underlying lack of capital. Legal threats do not cure low yield. To keep smallholders integrated in the European market, policymakers and importing companies must subsidize the required traceability infrastructure. We see a local jurisdictional solution taking shape in Luwu Utara, Indonesia. Local governments and private consortiums are building systems to map the supply base. The primary mechanism for this is the STDB, the Electronic Cultivation Registration Letter. Extension workers map smallholder plots, uploading the data to a centralized government database. To satisfy EU regulators, this data integrates with international organizations like the Rainforest Alliance, checking the local databases against automated deforestation risk assessment maps. This third-party infrastructure acts as a trust bridge. It translates the local registration data into the physical proof of compliance that European customs officials require. Executing this process, training extension workers, surveying scattered plots, and maintaining databases requires massive upfront financial investment that smallholders cannot generate on their own. Data compliance must be treated and funded as shared public infrastructure, rather than assigned as an individual farmer's responsibility. The EUDR is legally targeting the outcome of deforestation, while willfully ignoring the economic constraints that force farmers to clear land. If the cost of tracking remains too high, European operators will predictably alter their sourcing. To avoid the logistical friction of smallholder compliance, buyers will simply consolidate their contracts with large, well-capitalized agribusinesses. This would cause a rapid market fracture. If 98% of the supply base is abruptly excluded from European trade, millions of households will lose their primary source of income overnight. Impoverishing these communities will not save the forest. Stripped of access to premium markets, farmers will pivot to less regulated local markets, accelerating desperate, unregulated land clearing to compensate for lower crop prices. Environmental regulations only succeed when they solve structural economic problems, rather than just establishing legal boundaries. Securing global supply chains requires a shift in methodology, moving away from supply chain policing and toward active, subsidized supply chain integration. European policymakers and commercial operators must back their zero deforestation mandates with direct financial investments, providing smallholders with the fertilizers, disease control, and agronomic training they lack. The objective is a highly efficient, contained agricultural operation. By maximizing yield on existing land, the economic incentive to clear adjacent forests is neutralized. Alongside yield optimization, the digital infrastructure required to prove it, like the STDB and third-party risk mapping, must be funded from the top down. True global sustainability is achieved only by decoupling deforestation from poverty. We protect the environment when we ensure that farmers have the tools to grow their livelihoods without expanding their footprint.